We get to breathe together. I'm so excited. We're doing it all the time, but to breathe slower volitionally can be instantly pleasurable, or it can increase anxiety. So it's very easy with such beautiful and complex breathing science, as we heard from Jack, and as we hear from many different breathing experts from different cultures, that there are very specific ways, specific paces that we should be inhaling, exhaling, breath holding. And as someone who runs high on stress and has tried all of them and has led many people in many different kinds of settings and retreats, I can tell you that you must listen to your own body and adapt things your own way. There really is no right exact way or count. So I am going to lead you through breathing, and I'm inviting you to also adjust it for your own pace. So why don't we start with what Jack calls deep breathing, which he does himself, and what our colleague Andrew Huberman and David Spiegel have labeled the physiological sigh. This is one of the most simple and quick ways to change our breath, change our mood. So we're going to simply breathe in twice. So we're going to exhale twice to maximal lung capacity, and then a long exhale. And the exhale is really up to you in terms of how you want to do the exhale. So you can purse your lips, which makes it, there's a little bit more pressure, there's a little longer of an exhale. You can open your mouth and exhale loud. I want to hear the room exhaling. Or you can exhale very gently and slowly. And you can play with that. So we're going to do the sigh together. And I'll first show you it, and then we'll do it together. So it goes like this. We're going to do that 4 times together. Breathe in a big breath, breathe in a little breath all the way to the top, open up all the lung sacs, and then just a big, lovely, relaxing exhale. Let's begin. And it's also nice to do this with music, with soft music, because we know how the body responds to that added effect. Just let yourself notice and feel any consequences of that. You can do that anytime, anywhere. It could be a transition activity between meetings, between getting in the car. And when you first do these exercises, you might feel a little bit dizzy, a little panicky, and that is completely normal because we're readjusting some of the physiology, carbon dioxide tolerance. Jack told me to do breathing unadorned. We don't want to talk too much about the science because we get into the weeds of what's really proven and what's not. But we're altering basic stress physiology, and so you might feel all sorts of different feelings, but when you practice over time, you will feel ease. So we're next going to do some breathing with a little breath hold. And many of you have tried this, but it doesn't really matter because what matters is that we're going to do it together now and with all of our focus and attention, and your body is going to benefit. So whether you know this or not, we're going to do 4-7-8 breathing. I use 4-6-8 breathing because it's hard for novices to hold for 7. So we're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 6, and out for 8. And I'll count for the first 2 breaths, and then you'll do it on your own. So inhaling, 2, 3, 4. Holding, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Exhaling, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhaling and exhaling. Sorry, holding and exhaling. You can count in your head, or you can follow my counting, breathing in for 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Holding, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Exhaling, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now do this at your own pace, counting in your own head. And when you breath hold, just notice stillness. And when you exhale, you might picture a beautiful nature scene that your body responds to. It might be waves of the ocean. It might be mountains. Okay. Before we go on speaking and listening, I would just like to point out that the simplest and most powerful thing that you can do in the moment is slowing your breath. So the sigh is wonderful, the breath holding is wonderful, and at the fundamental level, slowing breathing from, let's say, 15 or 20 breaths per minute down to 8 or less turns our nervous system over toward parasympathetic dominance. And that's a way we can take control of our wild animal body and our stress response. Okay. So that was great to breathe slowly before getting us a bit into our heads. I am so excited to speak to you today about getting to blue mind to slow biological aging. Blue mind is the deepest restorative state that we can possibly experience in our 24-hour cycle. So what does that mean? That means during deep sleep. What is our nervous system doing? And that also means during the day. When do we have deep rest? When are we truly relaxed? Where are you at right now? What did you bring into the room? So getting to blue mind is a beautiful goal, and it's important from a public health perspective because it's the restorative state. It repairs our cells, it fights off the stress response, and the biggest obstacle is stress. So when we think about, so you're all stress experts, right? You know everything there is to know about stress. You are experts. You deal with it every day. And 60% of US adults complain that on a daily basis they feel overwhelmed with stress. So it is our front end epidemic. It is how our lifestyle, the front door to how our lifestyle goals are are not implemented despite our intentions. Now, in terms of biological aging, the new view of healthy aging is the field of geroscience. Geroscience is very different than the whack-a-mole approach of all of these diseases of aging that pop up soon after we hit maybe 50 years old. And so in the geroscience model, the view is underlying all of these diseases of aging, which many we can't cure or reverse, is biological aging, aging of our cells. And if we could just slow our biological aging, we can compress the onset of morbidity and mortality. So we all come with an expiration date on this body that we were born with. And the goal is healthy longevity, health span. How can we live with most joy, purpose, and well-being for as long as we can? So stress becomes central to this idea of slowing biological aging. So I'll show you the easy part of how we know that stress regulates aging, and then we'll get into the more challenging part of how we regulate our stress response. So for the last 15 years, our lab and others have been showing that different forms of chronic stress, early childhood trauma, chronic ongoing daily stress, certain states of psychological disorders that keep the stress response alive, like depression, accelerate biological aging in almost every cell system we've measured. They're all interrelated. So that means systemic inflammation, telomere shortening, mitochondrial dampening. The battery in our cells actually can be affected by our emotional states during the day, and epigenetic aging. So that's the bad news, and that's the easy part. The blunt way that we live, if we are living under chronic stress every day without managing it well, this is what happens. We accelerate our cellular aging. How can we disrupt chronic stress? So this is where we're learning a lot. We've looked at stress way too simplistically. We looked at the stress response. We look at people under acute stress. We look at stress physiology during stress. But actually, the action is when we're at rest. How much stress are we carrying? Because we're dealing with crises very little time, and we're thinking about stress much more of the time, or not thinking about stress. So how can we slow biological aging? We have focused on this acute stress response, and a high stress response is actually a healthy sign of a young organism. We want a quick recovery and a low baseline. So this person with the top red line is someone under chronic stress, the facilitated response. No problem with that, especially if we're looking at the autonomic nervous system. It's the slow recovery and the elevated baseline that we want to measure well, operationalize, and target. And we want to move ourselves into a baseline state of parasympathetic dominance. So how do we do that? How can we focus on understanding and measuring our baseline levels of stress, both conscious and unconscious? So we're not just stressed or relaxed. We have all of these mind states. And here you can see the range. So the acute stress response is not good or bad. We need it. It's why we're here. It's the yellow mind state that we need to pay attention to and manage with monitoring, with our mind's attention, with mindfulness. And we want to move ourselves toward this green mind and blue mind states that are more restorative. Our psychological framework, our default mode of feeling threatened, isolated, alone, at risk, that drives the arousal up at baseline, whereas feelings of safety and social connection bring us more easily to green mind and blue mind states. And I will say they are a prerequisite. We can't even do mind-body practices really and engage in them with our mind if we're not feeling social safety. So we really care a lot about restorative biology. And so we focus a lot on stress biology, and the other half to slow our aging is understanding what matters in our cells. So we focus on mitochondrial health with my colleague Martin Picard. We can measure that in human immune cells at rest, and we've shown that people under chronic stress have dampened mitochondrial enzymes. Positive emotion at the end of a stressful day is associated with higher mitochondrial enzymes, so we know it's a dynamic marker. So let's talk about what is the foundation of evidence for this deep rest state. Deep sleep and contemplative practices. We just published this paper. It'll go online probably in a week, but you can find a preprint on my website, my UCSF lab website. And here we review really a tremendous amount of evidence showing that when we can feel socially safe and reach these deep rest states, we turn on mitochondrial repair, DNA repair, telomerase to lengthen our telomeres, and growth factors, the opposite of the stress response. So the approach that we are studying and promoting is that we want to pay attention to how we feel in our default mode, in our rest state at baseline, and bring that down to more from a yellow mind to a green mind state. So we need to monitor, we need to know. Do you know your arousal level right now? You can guess, but now we have things like the Aura Ring. We have easy ways to know. And the other side, which I won't have time to talk about, but Ashley Mason will be talking about this after me, is that to reduce stress, we need stress, the good kind of stress, positive acute stress. The recovery from that is anti-aging, and there's a whole biology of that as well on my website. So it's the synergy between these two. We need to promote the mindset, move us away from the threat, anxiety, feeling alone and isolated, toward safety, toward openness to the future. Uncertainty stress is what is pervasive at our baseline, so we need to basically embrace and be comfortable with uncertainty. And think about our most elevated self. When do you love how you feel? Often it's being connected to other people, connected to nature. So what is the evidence for this deep rest state? Who here has been on a retreat? Okay, so your first, I'm going to move you to maybe a second retreat experience. First retreat experiences can be tough. You realize you have this mind that has its own thoughts. We've studied retreats. We see a lot of tears. We see a lot of anxiety on the first retreat. So there is a second retreat or practice or habituation effect that we think is very important. In this study, we randomized people to residential retreat for a week. They either got meditation training or they just came and relaxed, put away their computer. The main overwhelming finding is that whatever they did, just taking away the stress signals, giving them the safety signals, the anti-inflammatory diet, reduced gene expression 5 to 10-fold for fighting stress and immune invaders and turning on the restorative response that I described earlier, including some of the gene expression peptides that regulate brain amyloids. So that's an extreme case. You're at a retreat for a week. We did find 10 months later, those who learned meditation did change their baseline states. They did have improved mental health and lower depression 10 months later. So there are mind training effects here. It's not just relaxing for a week. But this is an evidence for what happens in the body. It's pretty dramatic. With machine learning, we could predict who had a retreat, who's for any one person, if their blood sample was at the beginning or the end of the retreat, we could predict that with 95% accuracy. So let me tell you about our new studies. Of course, retreats are not a public health solution, but slow breathing during the day and other practices that can put us into parasympathetic dominance within minutes is an easy hands-on solution. So we've been studying these short-term interventions in our lab. In this one, we studied slow breathing, 8 breaths per minute. You could all do this during the break. And what we found was that compared to many of our other conditions and control groups, that slow breathing, people liked it the most, they had the best adherence, but more importantly, it improved the acute stress response toward a more resilient response. It also improved, what we saw in this slow breathing condition that we didn't in other conditions was that during deep sleep, those who increased their heart rate variability had the most dramatic improvements in depression. So this was a sample of people with depression, and you can see that the correlation is minus 0.6, which is very high between this increase in heart rate variability during our deepest stages of sleep, just from 15 minutes of slow breathing a day for 3 weeks. So we're very excited to operationalize and define these deep rest states as a way to understand slowing biological aging. Here's a book I wrote. I don't have time to go into it, but you can grab it off our lunch table, and it goes through other practices. There are many ways to reduce perceived stress shown by research. The range for every mind state, there are things that we can do to shift us toward other mind states. Some people have said this is life-changing. The problem is, are you maintaining it? Are you training your brain so it's a habit? So we're working on tying this to self-monitoring of the heart rate of the autonomic nervous system, as well as helping people identify what state they want to shift into and know from monitoring whether they're in it. So what are we doing in our lab? We have a rejuvenation and restoration incubator, which just means that we have developed a quicker way to do clinical trials to iterate and test different methods of moving us into hormetic stress states and deep relaxation states to look at the effects on psychological safety, safety and threat states, states of interconnection and awe, as well as the biology of safety, which we've talked about, heart rate variability, cellular aging, restorative pathways. We are defining what is true baseline for an individual and what is an optimal stress response. So we're very excited about ways that we can slow biological aging and really get a handle on it. We know that reducing stress works, but it's just not that simple. It's really also about, are we in a restorative state? Can we know that? Can we have a positive stress response? So if you're interested in hearing more, please stay in touch. Thank you for listening.